Well, our focus story this evening, the Automotive Component Manufacturers Association of India, basically an association of people who make nuts and bolts that go into cars and bikes and vehicles. They've warned that around 10 lakh jobs would be lost if the slowdown in the automobile industry continues. Now, the industry that manufactures auto parts wants the government to intervene and slash the GST and try and give the industry a boost. Now, the association has termed the situation unprecedented, saying that vehicle sales have plummeted for the last several months. Industry contributes 2.3% of the country's GDP and employs 50 lakh people. Now, you'll remember we brought you the story of the fact that the automobile industry, because sales were down and dealers didn't have the ability to keep the vehicles, they have actually cut down production by 15 to 20% respectively in various automobile manufacturers. Now, when production gets cut, it's the component manufacturers who really get hit. My colleague Aishman standing by right now with details on this story. Aishman, what can you tell us from the conversations that you're having with the association and with specific manufacturers at this point?
Well, Faye, the ACMA had a board meeting today in Ahmedabad, and the officials said that it is a clear message that has to be given to the government that for past 10 months, from September 2018, there has been a plummeting decline in the automotive sector, and that is why it is very important for the government to intervene and to see as to what are the ailing issues that this sector is facing. If you look at the GST, the charge rate is high, and that is why they want a uniformity to be maintained out here, and that is why they say that 18% should be the capped amount and that should be charged to them. At the same time, the manufacturers say that most of these workers who are working along with them are the contract workers. So once the supply goes down, it is definitely the threat goes on to the contract workers and they are to be fired. The entire industry, they say that it is of 5 million people, and if this current trend continues, it may end up to be, they have to lay off at around 1 million people now. Now that is a very huge figure, but at the same time, the ACMA maintains that if government intervention is not there, it would soon be a reality.
Absolutely. And obviously, this is a reality from across the country. Aishman, thank you for bringing us that update. It's a very worrying situation at this point. My colleague Aishman joining us from New Delhi, telling us about how the association that's had a meeting today believes that if the government doesn't intervene, we could lose about 10 lakh jobs. Now, remember, if the industry altogether has about 50 lakh jobs, and losing a fifth of those jobs should be something that causes us immediate concern. In the conversation with me right now, Mr. Jagdish Khattar, the founder of Carnation Autos and also the former leader of Maruti, our largest car manufacturer. We also have Gopal Agarwal, spokesperson of the BJP right now. Mr. Khattar, good evening and thank you so much for giving us your time here at Mirror Now. My first question to you is this. You predicted this the last time you had a conversation with us on this channel. You said that if car manufacturers begin to cut production, which they have done, the impact will be on the ancillary industry. Do you believe we might lose 10 lakh jobs?
Let me put it this way, that probably the effect would be much more. You know, there is a thumb rule: for every two-wheeler, you create about 3 jobs. For every car you manufacture, you create about 7-8 jobs. And for trucks, etc., is much more. You see, it's not only the auto component manufacturers, transportation, all these vehicles, the spare parts come into the factory, the end product goes all across the country. The insurance companies, the finance companies, the dealers, 300 dealers have closed. Every dealership has about 100, 150 people in the service and all other areas. So the cumulative effect can be quite a lot, much more than what is being indicated. And the solution that has been given, GST, I don't think that will make much of a difference because the problems are far too many. I mean, you reduce the GST, but where is the finance? You know that banks were not giving in any case. Now the NBFCs are not giving. All right, they start financing. The purchasing power in the rural area has gone down. Unless they have purchasing power, because you find even the two-wheeler sales have gone down and they were very strong in the rural areas. Then in the urban areas, you have parking problems, all other congestion that has come. More importantly, the diesel car sales have come down. The price, the price with Euro 6 is going to go up. So the point I'm making is unfortunate that so many things have come together, not entirely all of the government making, but it so happens that part of it is there, part of it is there. So the situation can get even worse, and I don't see any, end of the tunnel, any light at the end of the tunnel. You have monsoons today. Okay, monsoon sales are in any case down. And now then you'll have a festival season. The problem started last festival season when the manufacturers loaded their network with inventory, and that sales never took place. And then at the end of the year. So the production that you have seen down is not 100% the same because the retails have been more. So I think we need to balance a little bit. The manufacturers have shut down their plants so that the dealers can reduce their inventory. And it was in yesterday's paper that the cars dealers' inventory has come back to more or less normal, but two-wheelers and heavy vehicles is still very high. So end, I think that there are too many people involved in this business, not only the competent manufacturers, and unless it picks up, the others are also affected, of which we don't know much. They are not sharing the data with us.
Well, let's ask Mr. Gopal Agarwal of the BJP. Mr. Agarwal, is the government looking at this seriously? Is the slash in GST the solution according to the government? Are there other solutions that are being explored at this point? Or are we, like you did last time, are you still going to argue that there is no problem?
No, I'm not saying there is no problem. Automobile industry is just facing some of the downturn in the demand. And I agree with Mr. Bhargav, and I have also met some of the automobile association. They have come to meet me and told about their problems. It is one of the sunrise industry on which our economy has a lot of dependence in our export also, in domestic market also, and its demand on steel. I agree with all this, and I agree that there is a slowdown in demand. But when we talk of the solutions, some of the solutions that are being suggested by association, etc., is not correct, because you cannot just say that GST is the cause of the problem, just reducing GST will help. It has the basic problem in the economy, as I had been telling and many people, is that we have to increase demand across all segments. So the government is working on that basis, that we have to create liquidity into the whole system so that the money flows to the rural areas, to the other areas, and even RBI, you see the governor's today interview, and 2 days back he gave an interview to Bloomberg, etc. We are understanding that we have to work on creating demand, overall demand in economy. It will in itself drive the investment. So lowering of interest rate we are doing, creating liquidity we are doing, and Mr. Gadkari has said that we are working on a new area for electric vehicle. There is a problem that if you fast track implementation of electric vehicle, there are challenges that has to be met. But we have seen that when the industry moved from emission 5 to emission 6 norm, they were facing problem, but ultimately environmental costs have to be looked into. The government is well appraised about the problems of the automobile industry, but you see the investment into infrastructure is creating demand for the steel, cement, etc., and even better roads will help into creating transportation demand. So this economic slowdown or fast tracking demand, everything has to be looked into on a consolidated basis. And when the associations talk about some of the issues, they definitely talk about the problems. But when they talk about the solutions, that is just a specific demand, stakeholder demand. We don't deny those demands, but still those demands are from every sector, and the government has to allocate resources between the best available resources. We are not increasing.
Okay, all right. So let me just bring Mr. Jagdish Khattar back in for a response.
We are reducing it. Okay. So we are under the solution process, and our economy is growing, so all will grow. But there are some sectoral problems which we are well appraised of and tackling.
Okay.
Them.
So I just want to point out this is the first time ever Mr. Gopal Agarwal has used the word slow down. He has actually used the word slow down, but he also talked about bringing in electric vehicles and building roads to increase demand. First of all, and I'll take the question to Mr. Khattar, but the point is that just bringing in roads is not going to increase the demand for vehicles. The point is that people don't have jobs at this point, and they're not getting raises at their jobs. They're not getting confidence in their offices because people are losing jobs. They're being fired left, right, and center. People are losing their jobs, and when you lose your job or your colleague is losing their jobs, you don't want to buy a car at that point and take a loan because you don't have confidence in the economy. You don't have confidence in your own job. That's the problem. How do you reinforce the confidence? Mr. Khattar was smiling also with the mention of electric cars. Mr. Khattar, I mean, electric cars are a different platform altogether. It's not the same as going from emission 4 to emission 5, is it?
No, listen, one of the reasons why the sales have gone down is because the government is talking about electric vehicles. You know, electric vehicles will take a lot of time. The industry and the petroleum industry have invested 1,60,000 crores in bringing the Euro 6. You know, it takes few years for you to amortize that cost. And even before the Euro 6 has been implemented, we are talking about electric vehicles. You know, you have heard some of the major leaders of the industry saying that we have spent so much of money, let us amortize it first. But you are talking about electric vehicles. Now, what does the customer do? He waits. You see, people, you have talked about jobs, yes, increment, etc., etc. But we are also confusing the customer. Should he wait for Euro 4? Should he buy Euro 6, which is coming? Or the electric vehicles, which according to me will take a lot of time. But why create that uncertainty in the market? And well, you know, you cannot make a success of electric vehicles unless the major players are on board. I think the government has to take all stakeholders on board. You know, earlier in 2000, we had taken a decision, manufacturers along with the government, that we'll have a 10-year roadmap. And for every milestone of emission, of safety, it will be given. And then for 10, 12 years, we followed the same. Do we have a roadmap for electric vehicles? No. You have heard Honda motorcycles saying, we are not going to invest in any expansion. We'll only bring new models. You know, this uncertainty, lack of investment, and all that is creating a lot of problems. So besides the economic factors, this is uncertainty and clarity in government policy. I think that is also required. Government should give a roadmap for electric vehicles. UK says that they will get electric vehicles which they started 15 years earlier by 2040. We are talking about within these 20s. So, I mean, what can I say in this? I feel very sorry for the industry. I feel sorry for the customers. I feel sorry for the people who are losing their jobs. And I think the government needs to take all these factors into account, sit down with all the stakeholders and find an action plan which gives confidence to the industry, confidence to the customer, and then we should move forward. And there are so many elements in it. I mean, finance is there, all others are there. And I don't think there's any one solution for it. It's a very holistic and number of things have to be done.
Mr. Khattar, also, you know, Mr. Agarwal pointed out the fact that this is an industry-specific problem. But if we consider the larger picture at this point, agro industry is facing a problem, FMCG is facing a problem in consumer demand, real estate is facing a problem in consumer demand, you know, white goods is facing a problem in consumer demand. Is this specific to the auto industry, and would there be a glaring error if the solution was also then, you know, looked at as specific to the auto industry?
Faye, I am talking about the solution specific. GST, they are talking about the specific sector.
Okay. Mr. Khattar, please.
No. You know, what you're saying is correct. The whole economy has to come back on rails. All other things have to be, if all these things that, you know, are going down, rural area is 30–40% of the market today. And today they have been affected as far as their liquidity is concerned. So you're right. It's not only for the auto industry. What I have mentioned is relevant for all industries, and therefore we need the entire ecosystem to improve. By especially GST reduction and all is not going to make any difference.
All right, so this is where we are. The economy is slowing
That's what
down.
I was telling, Faye.
The economy is slowing down. The auto industry is talking about an impact on 10 lakh jobs. Mr. Khattar, who is an expert of the auto industry, the former managing director of Maruti, tells us it could be far more than 10 lakh jobs because there are many, many jobs that are dependent on the auto industry. Now, remember, we've brought you stories in the past about the fact that it's not just auto. It's also real estate, it's white goods, it's fast-moving consumer goods, it's toothpaste, soap. All of these things are facing a dip in consumer interest and consumer demand. The economy has slowed down and the confidence right now is fairly subdued. The government needs to look at step-by-step solutions. And as Mr. Khattar pointed out, there needs to be clarity in government policy. Now, announcing the fact that you will bring in electric cars when you are nowhere near bringing electric cars has actually confused the consumer even further, given them more reason to put off their purchases, whereas it will be several years before we have electric cars in India. Confusion in terms of policy, slowdown of the economy, more jobs will be lost, the worse it will get unless the government gives us a clear plan on how they're going to revive the economy. In news that's coming in, the CBI has issued fresh summons to TMC MP Derek O'Brien in connection with the Sharda chit fund scam. Mr. O'Brien has been asked to join the investigation before the Kolkata unit of the agency in the first week of August. He has in fact been summoned earlier as well. But at that time, Derek O'Brien claimed that he was busy with the Parliament session. He is going to have to appear before the CBI Kolkata unit fairly soon. Bhavtosh is on the phone line right now. Bhavtosh, good evening. What can you tell us about this summons?
The summons has been issued by the Kolkata unit of CBI, which is probing not only Aadhar chit fund scam, but also the Rose Valley scam. This is the same scam which has been under a lot of political blame between TMC and Centre. TMC has always said that they are being targeted while the CBI carries out this probe, primarily because the Centre wants to somehow get back at Mamata Banerjee. But CBI has clarified that they have issued at least two summons to Derek O'Brien in March. The first one was in fact issued in March, and then again one was issued in a month later. At both the time, Derek O'Brien claimed that he was busy with Parliament and later with the election. This particular matter pertains to some of the paintings that Mamata Banerjee had made between 2010 and also in 2011. These paintings were repeatedly purchased at a very high rate, at a very high rate by Sarda promoter Sudipto Sen. One of the paintings was sold off for at least 1 crore rupees. CBI suspects that this was a donation that was being made by Sudipto Sen so that TMC does not go after him. Because this was also a time when the Sarda chit fund scam started defaulting on payments and also on the depositors' money. And CBI believes that this was some kind of protection money that was being paid to TMC.
All right, Bhavtosh, thank you for that update. So, but Derek O'Brien being asked, summoned to appear before the Kolkata unit of the CBI in the chit fund scam. Remember, that rocked Bengal. We keep a track of that story for you, bring you updates when it does happen. Moving on now to a heart-wrenching story that should just make us all hang our heads in shame, really. It's a story from Pilibhit in Uttar Pradesh, where a 6-year-old tigress was brutally beaten to death by villagers. She was beaten with sticks until she fled the spot, and the video is just offensive. There are points where you can see this magnificent creature begging for people to stop. It is ridiculous. Even though the tigress managed to flee from the spot where she was being beaten, she did succumb to her injuries in a different location. A video of this brutality has also surfaced, where you can see portions of it on your screen. Now, according to the post-mortem details of the tigress died because of fractures and serious wounds. An FIR has been registered against 14 people. Now, the people of the village allege that the tigress had attacked 9 villagers, which is what forced them to take this step. The bigger question is, why isn't the wildlife, especially our national animal, protected in this country? The question is, if these villagers in Pilibhit, which incidentally was Menaka Gandhi's constituency until this election, it is now her son's constituency, why wasn't the wildlife, the IFS or the forest officials available to solve this problem if these villagers felt that the tiger was an issue? Why were the villagers allowed to take this matter into their hands? It's a terrible, terrible state of affairs. Joining me on the show, Dr. Gerald Bernard is a wildlife activist, and Anish Andrea is the president of the Wildlife Conservation Trust. I welcome both of you to this conversation. Anish, if I may start with you, it's obviously a terrible video that has surfaced. Now, we have a system in this country. There are forest officers who are supposed to come in and handle a situation when it comes to a human and an animal conflict. I don't see any forest officers in this visual at all, and this is obviously inside the reserve. What were these villagers doing inside the reserve? These are questions we must ask at this point.
Okay, so first of all, let me get the statistics right. India has 50 tiger reserves, and there are 3 million people living inside India's 50 tiger reserves. A tiger reserve is divided into a core and a buffer zone. Inside the core, there are 35,000 families even today. And in the buffer zone, which is as big as the core generally, you have 3 million people. So people and tigers live alongside each other. That's the first thing. Secondly, this tigress was not attacked in a village or in a farmland. It was a person who went into the forest, and basically they live in the forest. So they go to the forest almost every day to collect firewood or for some other minor forest produce collection. So the person must have gone very close to the animal, and the animal obviously, in nature, it's very simple. Attack is the best defense. When an animal gets scared and when the person is too close is when the animal attacks, but it's never attacked to kill. And when that happens, there must be a lot of people around, and they must have charged the animal. And obviously, as you can see, the tigress was massacred after that. And this is not just the case of Pilibhit. Something like this has happened in several states, in Kerala, in Karnataka. It has happened in Uttarakhand, and again, you see it in Uttar Pradesh. So this is happening more and more. It's largely because there are too many people living alongside wild animals. B, the forest department obviously is not funded enough, so they don't have enough equipment, they don't have the kind of sophisticated vehicles that are needed to combat something like this. There has to be a rapid response unit on the ground, and let me tell you that if a thing like this happens, it's like you see these kind of situations in a city when there is a fight that just breaks open. It's very difficult for a police force to be there when it happens. This happens in seconds, and so unless you have a system and the drills in place wherein the department actually practices on a daily basis, even if an attack is not happening, this is almost impossible to curtail. And when you have a mob, and I believe that the forest guards and the people from the department were beaten up and they were chased away. And so the tiger, so they may have tried to intervene, but obviously when a mob acts, it's almost impossible to control people. Everybody becomes a hero there, and there is no single leader. Everybody behaves like a person who knows and who wants to be better than the other one, and as a result, an animal goes. Anyways, in the country, tigers, the forests, and other wildlife cannot vote, so people will always get precedence over wildlife. And so what you see now is something that's going to only go up. As a wildlifer, as a conservationist, as a naturalist, as a scientist, I can tell you that since last 20 years, these kind of incidences have only grown, and going into the future, I don't see any reprieve for animals unless a lot more funding is given to the forest department, and along with it, there are these kind of systems that are built in, rapid response units, and a dedicated team, and that too a response unit per range, because animals and people live in close proximity with each other across the country.
Well, we also have Dr. Gerald Bernard who joins us right now. So here's some of the details that we've picked up. Former field director of the Tiger Reserve, G.C. Mishra, said the tigress could have been rescued given if she had received timely aid and the forest officials reached the spot on time. Their inability to rescue the injured cat in a span for over 9 hours reflects their inability to protect wildlife. So there's obviously here a problem with the forest department, as you mentioned the last time we talked about this sort of a problem.
Absolutely rightly said by you and Mr. Anish, that there is a huge difference between the reality and what is being shown on paper. There has to be a national vigilance team who should take care of these man-animal conflicts. They should recognize these eco-sensitive zones where there is huge number of man-animal conflict going on. Like this is in Pilibhit, there is many locations in Maharashtra like Brahmapuri, there are in Karnataka, everywhere, all throughout the nation, there are sensitive zones where man-animal conflict is on a rise. There has to be a team and a dedicated team which is trained properly, which has proper infrastructure. They have tranquilizers, they have elephants, they have the dedicated people and forest officials who can deal with these kind of situations. This is not the first time when a tiger was attacked. There have been incidences where a leopard was being rescued and the forest officials were not given any chance, and these people were just like a mob lynching situation. They go haphazardly and risk their life as well. Any killing, may it be of a human being, may it be of a national animal, is not justified. But we need to have a system, a combat system, to deal with these kind of situations. There has to be technology developed. There has to be radio collaring done of these tigers so that the villagers can be notified if there is a movement of a tiger in the vicinity of a village. Secondly, identification of these soft spots is very important. Then tranquilizers have to be deployed, and any movement of a tiger near a village, the entire village should be notified that they should not come out of that area. And when this kind of situation happens, police and law should come into action, and they should declare Section 144, and no people should be allowed in this area so that forest officials can do their own job. Now, if the forest officials were over there and they were chased back, the tigress unfortunately had to lose her life, and so did 9 people. They were at a risk and they could have also died because of this attack. And this attack happened as a fight or flight reaction of the tigress. To save herself, she attacked and tried to run away. Had there been a better responding team, this could have been avoided. The 9 people who were injured in this particular incident could have been avoided. Even the tigress could have been saved.
Right. I'm just going to quickly go back to Anish. Anish, if you at this point were to point out one solution, because there are several complicated points at this, several complicated reasons. The numbers, several people argue that the numbers of tigers are increasing and that's why the conflict has increased. Do you agree with that point, that because India has done such a fantastic job of saving the tiger from 1,800, we've gone up to about 2,500 tigers, that's the reason why man and tiger are now in conflict?
So we are just 2 or 3 days away from the Global Tiger Day. And so there are 13 tiger range countries. Of that, India supports 65% of all tigers. The remaining 12 countries have less than 35%. And over the last 15 years, tiger population has progressively gone up. However, let me put it on record that this population is still suboptimal. There is enough forest in this country to support more than 10,000 to 12,000 tigers. So what we have now is less than 1/4 of what India can support. So I don't think these problems are happening because tiger numbers are going down. The problems are happening because the forest is getting degraded rapidly. So when I say 3 million people live inside tiger reserves, so when most people think tiger reserves are places where tigers live, and if an attack happens there, then it's the fault of the animal. But can you imagine 3 million people living inside 50 tiger reserves, which is 2.3% of India in terms of geographical area. Another startling fact is that there are 100 million people who live along the periphery of this 50 tiger reserves that we talk, which means there is huge amount of pressure in terms of fuel wood, in terms of grazing, and in terms of minor forest produce collection. Obviously, these people are poor and they are dependent on the forest. Not now, they have been dependent for hundreds of years. So now that the densities have gone much higher and the forests have shrunk progressively. So while we talk about increasing tiger population, globally, the habitat of tiger has shrunk by 93.5%, which means about 100 years ago, what we had, now we have just 7% of that left. So the habitat has gone down, and the habitat which is small now has become degraded, which means the tree cover is there. So when you go as a novice, you will see that the forest is looking good, but actually the forest has thinned down, because every single day, and as per research that my organization does and a lot of other people have carried out, a family that lives in the forest in India is currently using 10 to 12 kgs of wood every single day for either heating water or for cooking. And so you can imagine the pressure on the biomass of the forest. So when that happens, tigers merely are an indicator of a problem. They are not a problem. Sorry. So what happens is, because of the degraded forests, tigers don't have enough wild prey to eat, and therefore automatically they go for cattle or livestock. When they do that, they come in direct conflict with people. I have studied tigers for last more than 1.5 decades. There have been times when I have walked in the forest alone or just with another assistant, and I have seen tigers on foot. Almost always the tiger didn't even wait there for more than 2 seconds. There has been not a single occasion in my entire life, which in terms of conservation nearly 30 years, that a tiger has actually charged towards me. And so you can imagine that when you see these kind of conflicts, and people normally on television feel that tigers are menacing, but actually if tigers were menacing, there are 2,226 tigers as per 2014 reports. We would have lost nearly 2,200 people every 3 days in India, because if they were predisposed to attack people. But that's not true. There are tigers that are within stone throw distance from human population. So please understand that you cannot radio color every single tiger to know its whereabouts, because there are tigers in the buffer zone.
Yes.
And this incident happened because the person and the tiger came head on. But if you had a radio collar on a tiger, you will give so many false alarms that people will get even more hyper, because there will be tigers around the village almost every day.
Yes.
But 99, no, or maybe
100%.
1 out of 1,000 is when a person actually sees a tiger. But if you had a system which monitors every single tiger in India, A, it will be extremely expensive, and B, people will always be on tenterhooks, because our study has shown on radio collar, some of the WII studies on radio collared tigers have shown that tigers move in and out of villages almost every other day without anybody noticing them. And that's true with tigers, that's true with leopards and all carnivores, because they are stealthy. So I think the issue is much larger. It is about land use. It is about trying to see how we can have a balance between the land use by the people and by large carnivores. So importantly, 2-3 things that one must do is, A, there has to be awareness, which means people need to know what to do when they are exposed to a large carnivore. Most people who live in these areas are exposed to carnivores, so it is not so difficult. It is not a Bombay or a Delhi person who has to be taught. They know. So the forest department should be more visible. There has to be small groups, and there have to be green guards within the village who act as ears and mouth and of the forest department. So there has to be a concrete plan to involve the villagers in this kind of a situation, because they will be the best to communicate to their fellows. A department going out, already people are annoyed because they are restricted to go into the forest. And by the way, it is not about tigers. The issue here, and why are we all talking about tigers? And a lot of people ask me, why do you talk of tigers when people have nothing to eat? So the important thing is, tigers are only a symbol for the forest, and we need to protect these forests. Otherwise, your river systems will be gone. Today, as I talk, several river basins are drying. So please, this issue, we should not reduce it to a tiger-human issue. It is basically the degradation of the forest which is causing the kind of stress in people, and therefore you get the violence out of people. So we need to somehow change the perception. So education, good amount of funding so that they have equipment, which is rapid response units and all that. You need teams on the village, and you need a forest department that is far more extrovert, which means going out in the village and talking. So that's what I think we must do.
And I just want to point out, at this point, we have a government in place that believes in giving faster clearances for forest and environment to businesses in order to reach a target of a $5 trillion economy faster. So basically, the Environment Ministry has taken on a challenge of clearing the forest faster, which means the Environment Ministry has completely misunderstood its job at this point. We have reached a point in this country where we can no longer afford to roll the dice on the environment. What you're seeing on your screen is heart-wrenching, and the reason why it's happening, Anish put it really well, is not because the tiger and the humans came face to face. It's because we've treated our environment with disrespect. In Maharashtra, we've given 400 hectares of land inside a tiger buffer zone to a company to build a cement factory. We're treating our forests with very little respect. And we will have to pay that bill at some point. We thought we would make our children pay that bill, but it turns out we're going to have to pay that bill because we've run out of time. At least in India, with the drought and the floods, we've run out of time. 33 people have been arrested in Noida from a fake call center. The accused apparently would dupe people on the pretext of providing them loans at low interest rates. Now, the police say the accused would call up customers and ask them for money in the name of various charges, but the loans were never delivered. The accused were held after a police raid of their office. Now, the owner of the fake call center and 2 others are absconding, but that's just the beginning of this story. We've received several complaints, especially from senior citizens who get phone calls from random call centers saying basically that your debit card is going to be blocked unless you give me your Aadhar number and your debit card PIN right now over the phone. Or that you're being given a loan, all you have to do is to give me your Aadhar number or your PIN or some other details over the phone. And what happens then is once these details are accessed, they steal money out of your account. Is there a rise in this sort of fraud? If you ask yourself right now, or the people sitting next to you, have you received a phone call of this nature? It's very likely that almost everyone will say yes. Joining me on the show right now to help us understand what we can do to prevent or to guard ourselves from this sort of thing, Brijesh Singh is the IG Cybercrime of Maharashtra, a brilliant mind on this matter. Pawan Dugal is a cyber law expert. Gentlemen, good evening and thank you for joining us. Brijesh Singh, good evening. You first. This was an arrest that was made in Noida, but there are a lot of senior citizens who write to us saying they get these phone calls on a regular basis. People calling them, asking them for details of their bank account, asking them for details of their Aadhar number or the PIN of their debit card. How rampant is this right now?
This is actually rampant and a lot of people do get these calls. In fact, in response to this, Maharashtra Cyber has come up with a website called reportphishing.in, where we are collaborating with all the possible stakeholders, and these stakeholders respond immediately as a first response measure, because each scammer is making multiple of these calls. And it is important, let us say it's a payment gateway, it's a bank, it's a merchant, it's important to inform that this number or this particular account is making these calls. And once we receive a call, complaint on reportphishing.in, we immediately inform all stakeholders. This is at least helping us prevent these scams. But this is definitely a widespread problem.
There's obviously an increase in targeting senior citizens here, because maybe these people feel that senior citizens are gullible or easy targets at this point. Do you think that people should be more careful about the phone numbers that they answer calls from? Should we just not share any details? Is there any way to check whether or not the call is genuine?
In fact, this is what you call a low-tech hack. It's almost a no-technology hack. What people are doing is that they are impersonating an authority figure or an organization. They're building trust, and it is actually a part of a multi-stage crime. So when a call reaches you, actually, there has been a lot of research already, like probably from social media or from other data breaches. Personal information has been taken. Now, what is needed is that significant information which allows them to, let's say, breach a two-factor authentication or, getting a password or a PIN, which would lead to compromise of your account. What can be done is that people should be made aware. In fact, I should thank your channel for bringing this up. A lot of people would be seeing this, and next time they receive a call, they would treat it with suspicion. So, these people create a sense of urgency by saying that, your account is getting blocked, or these calls are also very contextual. Let us say if it's a time of filing income tax, then they would say that, something linked to that. And this contextuality makes you believe that this call is real. It's highly organized. They even, copy, let us say, pieces of music which are used by call centers, which are used by real call centers. So it's like phishing, but on a voice scale. And people need to be made aware that if there is a sense of urgency which is being created, if somebody is trying to ask for personal information, then they need to be very aware. If something looks suspicious, then it is, because no bank or no institution is going to ask for your personal details, your PIN number, your password, your CVV. They're never going to ask for that. Underline that. They are never going to ask for any of this information, because this can lead to compromise of your account and loss of money.
Well, I want to take the question to Pawan Duggal now. Mr. Duggal, good evening to you. We've had this conversation in the past about data being stolen or data being used. And a lot of times when someone makes a call of this kind, and I'm actually telling you real instances of people writing to us, they'll call you, say, you know, I'm calling from, say, SBI Bank. When you have an account with SBI Bank, how do they know that? How do they have your phone number? How do they know you have a credit card or a debit card? How do they know which branch of the bank that that you're banking with? Where is all of this data coming from? Because it's with this data that the entire, it's on the base of this data that the entire fraud is set up.
Clearly, the banking system's data networks are leaking, whether it's as a result of internal leakage or whether it's unauthorized hacking. It's all very simple that this information about banks' customers is all available for a consideration in the market. And once you're able to buy that information, then you can specifically target them. And all this is happening because there's no data protection law in the country. We also have a fundamental right to privacy under the Indian Constitution, but that's only enforceable against the state action. A majority of these banks, though they may be state, they are completely oblivious of what their legal obligations are going to be vis-a-vis protecting the data privacy of citizens. Also, the inability of the police to actually go ahead, register and entertain any such requests against the banks often acts as a detriment. The Reserve Bank of India clearly has mandated some very strict parameters on cyber security, but it is also a given fact that a majority of these banks are not 100% compliant. And these low-hanging fruits in the form of access to data for branches is available for a minor hack or is available for minor considerations of money. So I think unless until we don't, as a nation, have a strong data protection law, we do not specifically come up with effective remedies for affected persons, it is going to be a challenge. Under the IT Act, your financial information, your credit card, debit card, other data is sensitive personal data. But a majority of the banks are not currently being sensitized to the fact that they could be exposed to unlimited damages under Section 43 of the IT Act. However, since not a single rupee has ever been granted under these damages regime in the country, everybody tends to think that it's absolutely fine and that you could go ahead and use the bank's data with impunity. So I think it's time that we strengthen the networks, we increase awareness, and of course, ultimately, we have to strengthen the hands of the ultimate users so that they do not themselves get stuck up in this net or the web that's being created by cyber criminals.
In fact, I have this question now to ask Brijesh Singh. Brijesh Singh, is it true that right now a bank or a phone company or any other insurance company, any of these companies that I'm actually accessing for a service, can sell that database of phone number, category of usage, which means how much money I have in my account, or which bank or which branch I'm banking with? Is it possible that these companies are selling our data for a profit because there's no law against it?
The personal data protection regulation that is coming in India will take care of a lot of these things. But a lot of companies which operate in India also operate internationally, and they are subject to the GDPR. The GDPR is very, very stringent about such personal data. So after the advent of GDPR, there is a lot of rationality in this space, and I think it's very, very difficult to sort of legally sell this data for any other use than it is intended. Also, companies do take care to maintain, data leakage prevention policies, and there is a lot of cyber security around data also. But as I told, that these things are multi-stage. So these kind of data breaches, what they occur, what happen is basically that from one breach, people take this data, they sell these pieces on the darknet, and there are aggregators who use this data to use the same credentials and try it on other sites, generate more data, and hence, create a basis for the next stage of cybercrime, wherein this money is taken out, given to a whole money mule network, and such, multi-stage crimes can be conducted.
So, last question to Pawan Dugal. It actually just boils down to the laws, because if we don't actually protect our data, these arrests are pointless, because the people who've been arrested from this call center are actually just employees of a fraudster. They will be replaced by other people who will come and do the same thing, because the data is floating around the net or the dark net. It's being made available to fraudsters. It's that problem that we need to solve, right?
I completely agree. It's time that we will have to strengthen the legal frameworks. One of the historical mistakes done by the Information Technology Act amendments in 2008 of transforming a majority of cyber crimes as bailable offences is crying for rectification. It's time to come up with stringent punishments for unauthorized access, usage or processing of data. And this is not just sensitive personal data, it is also going to be personally identifiable data and data. And also, I think till such time the new law does not come across, the government has the power to come up with secondary legislations and rules and regulations under Section 87 of the IT Act, which still are waiting to be coming up in place. Also, at the end of the day, ultimately, whatever these data is ultimately going forward is data and information in the electronic form. Strong legal frameworks is the crying need of the hours. However, for the users, please do not wait for these laws to come up in place. Please secure yourself. Do not give your data, as your data is only required to be disclosed on a need-to-know basis. Do not trust people. Please inculcate a culture of distrust against all these calls, against whatever you see online. Once you start getting stingy about sharing your data, once you start incorporating cyber security as part of your daily cyber hygiene and day-to-day life, I think you will be relatively far more secure, and the potentiality of you becoming a victim of cybercrime will be reduced to bare minimum. So please ensure that you are appropriately well aware, have more capacity built amongst people, and ultimately request the government to come up with strong laws, and finally effectively enforce those laws so that these kinds of cyber crimes could be reduced to the bare minimum possible.
All right, if you happen to be in the state of Maharashtra, like Brijesh Singh, the Inspector General, the IG of Cybercrime, Maharashtra has told us that there is a website, a phishing website that you can use to make any sort of complaint if you receive a call of this nature. But really, while the government is in a tearing hurry to amend the RTI Act and weaken our RTI, they should be in a similarly tearing hurry to strengthen our data protection laws. But for some reason, that bill is not ready yet. We appeal to the government to strengthen our data protection laws, because that's the only way to stop crime like this. In the meantime, do me a favor, sit down with every single family member, especially senior citizens, and brief them. Tell them that no bank will actually ask for any of your data. So they will not ask you for your Aadhar number or your PIN or your debit card number on the phone. Don't give it to them. If you get a call saying there's a problem with your bank account, say, I will go to the bank branch and solve it. Hang up. And then, of course, use the number to file a complaint. But don't share your information with anyone, whether they promise you a credit card or a loan, or they actually say that there's a problem with your card and we'll block it. Don't give anybody any of your details. Now, that brings us to the end of this conversation. I want to thank our guests for spending time with us this evening. We're going to come back after the break with another conversation about why MLAs and ministers and politicians are switching sides, and whether or not you and I deserve more as voters. And we will also pay tribute to the heroes of Kargil. On the other side, don't go anywhere.